Think Forward. Think Research Channel.
Hello, I'm Lee Thornton. Today, a moment with filmmaker Haile Gerima, who directs movies that are anything but Hollywood. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
Before we talk, Kim Skeen reports on the man and his movies.
Carolina, you waiting Africans, step out and tell your story.
My film projects are projects that I feel I would like them to exist along all the other stories told, without coming at the stories saying, are they credible? Can they sell? Would people watch them? These are things that censor stories from people. So what I do is I don't ask those questions. I say, well, I'm hungered for this story, so I go out of my way for years to find the money to do them.
As an independent filmmaker, Haile Gerima avoids conforming to what he calls the Hollywood formula.
It's just your accent, your temperament, altering it to speak like those movies they have made. Standard itself is almost a cultural genocide. To me, all human beings have a very unique accent in the way they tell their story. So the thing is not the theme. The theme is universal. You know, love, hate, betrayal.
Gerima has learned independence requires funding. He spent 9 years raising the money to produce his most acclaimed film, Sankofa, a dramatic tale of African resistance to slavery.
My wife and me, we believed in it and said, even if nobody came to see it, it has to be exorcised out of us. I had to do it. It was like I was obsessed by it.
The award-winning film drew huge audiences and long lines at theaters.
It was very powerful to see, millions of black people hugging me, crying, and thanking me, and from here to South Africa, and saying, with all its imperfection, they didn't mind because it quenched a hunger. Who's going to tell it uncompromised, even imperfectly?
Gerima's written, directed, and produced movies and documentaries. He's editing a new film called Taser, a drama set in his homeland of Ethiopia.
Okay. Lay that track there, but at least have it here.
Okay. It's part of his soul. Like, his scripts become part of his soul. So he works and he knows them, and it's just pieces of himself, so he can just spew them out.
His edit room is located in a multi-purpose center Gerima created with his wife. Sankofa, a video and bookstore and soon-to-be coffee shop, is also a local meeting place. He says it's liberated territory for independent thinking.
The unique contribution, I think, in the independent scene is my ability to do low-budget films. That craft I have developed very well, and I'm proud of that. So what I do is, I said to myself, transfer this to young people.
He does that as a professor of cinema at Howard University. He also conducts a free script writing workshop at Sankofa.
Once a person gives you the benefit of listening to you, you owe them to listen back to their feedback.
He allows you to do just that, to find your voice. And he doesn't necessarily persuade you to go in any one direction. And I think that he's not, when he teaches cinema, he's not trying to make carbon copies of himself. Young people have a capacity to recharge your battery. They can inspire you.
Gerima believes filmmakers have the power to heal the past by telling their stories.
For me, telling stories, however irrelevant society thinks, if it's resonating in you, there's some force wanting to tell it. And if that society doesn't want to hear it today, they might hear it 100 years from now. But your job is to tell it, to scream it.
Haile Gerima will continue telling stories. He already has ideas for future films. Kim Skeen reporting for A Moment With.
So good, so visual, your work. Stories that are part of the soul, one of your students said. And you bring to that a different personal history. You're Ethiopian by birth, and it is Gerima. Yes, Gerima, I want to say it properly. Your father was a writer, your mother was a teacher,
Yes.
and you had your early education in Ethiopia.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it's not only my mother and my father, but also my grandmother. You know, I grew up, I was one of the 10 kids when electricity came to our house. And before electricity, we all sat around the fireplace listening to our grandmother. And for me, storytelling is just a way of life. And I also, became aware at early age that telling your story is how you also grow as a person, reciprocating with people who listen to your story. And that is my earlier nurturing.
Your grandmother then, now, griot tradition is West African, you are East African. What's the counterpart? Was she the counterpart of the griot in East Africa?
Yeah.
What are they called?
Well, I would say in our language, it will be like Margeta or Manakuse. It all implies elders who have the right to speak to you, to give you the context of your existence. And that, I think, is universal.
What kind of stories did she tell?
Well, mostly about, for example, she, oftentimes uses the stories of animals, but it's about value system, a way of life, and the kind of manners and relationship one needs to cultivate in the context of a community. But she also taught history. My grandmother was she was actually in favor of another king that Haile Selassie overthrew. And so she was very politically folklorist, telling us about this true king who should have been a king. So it's also political around the fire education.
Added to that storytelling tradition was the fact that you also were part of a theatrical troupe that your father maintained.
Yes, he did have a very, in fact, I had to come to Chicago to really appreciate him, because in a drama school at Goodman School of Drama, I learned how mobile theater at the time of the early 60s, late 70s was becoming a phenomenon. My father did it in this town. He used to take us away from the town with a play and shows this historical drama he wrote.
Now you came to the Goodman School of Drama in the 60s.
Yes,
as
late
a
60s.
20-year-old?
21.
21. And so began your American journey.
Yes.
And from there you went to UCLA to study film.
Well, initially I went to really continue in theater until I made the transition by accident into filmmaking.
Tell me about your earliest film work and how you came to know what you wanted to do. You were in California. This is well before the break that Hollywood gave to Spike Lee. But did you ever want to do commercial film?
No. It was a group of African American, Native Americans. At the time we called Chicanos. We had a third world organization within Howard University, within UCLA. And our thing was, at that time, part and parcel of the political climate of the country, the world, globally, the whole politics of the world was shifting. And so we were actually watching, like many even who later became Hollywood big filmmakers, we were looking at cinema that asserted a new kind of narrative, a new kind of story. So the whole climate was so political, everybody was, very phobic towards Hollywood. So for me, I was part and parcel of that. And so when every film we were trying to make, we were trying to find our voice, our identity, and not submit to the formula. So it's the climate
So
of
you
the
knew
time.
you knew virtually from the beginning that you would be an independent filmmaker.
Oh yeah, as I went to the film school, I would say I was confused in Chicago, but once I got to UCLA and then stumbled into cinema at the time of the political crisis of my personal life, then cinema became a weapon for me to really comprehend my own turbulence.
Cinema as a weapon. You've said that. I've read that you've said that. Talk more about that idea.
Well, it's in the end really a weapon. It's not like, I prefer it than gun because it's a weapon to convince people or to tell people your story. And so for me, even the exploitation cinema is really a weapon in the end of an idea that comes. You can go to a simple village in Latin America or Africa. A single movie would come and the people would change their lips, their hair, their nose, everything by one movie. And that implication and what it does to other people and the way it alters their way of life is the most unresearched, unstudied, the most ignored phenomenon.
Did you ever try to go through the system to distribute your film, say, for Sankofa, for example?
We did at the time, but the hostility we were met was, very enormous.
How did it manifest itself?
For example, Sankofa opened big in Berlin at the Berlin International Film Festival. We made the film in a basement here in Washington, D.C. with meager, small money from international co-production groups we put together. And when we opened it, the American press, the American film, spokespeople were totally hostile because one, it didn't come from them, it's not sponsored from them, and they couldn't handle it. So we were met by hostility, although we were the only independent independently made film that was in competition with all these mega Hollywood films. And that was not even spoken about. When we did Berlin, then Montreal, Toronto, the press from NPR to everything ignored us until the black community in America sponsored us through this idea of Sankofa family and opened it. And then you see Washington Post, Time Magazine, New York Times, because black people lined up. But before that, we were literally omitted. So it didn't give us a chance to even present our product for so-called the profit relationship. It was just hostility. You couldn't believe it. One movie could create such a hostility. It awakened us.
Well, it's hard for me to believe you made that film in a basement.
We did.
It's so visually rich.
Did. Oh yeah, we did. Well, the actual editing, the production company was under my basement, but the editing we did, it was shot in 35. We had the audacity without the money to shoot in 35. We edited in Virginia at a Bono Film Lab. And the production value, we were bent on making it be in the level of any film made in the system. In fact, most people would estimate it to be a $16 to $18 million budget, the production value, but we did only for $1 million.
1 million.
Yeah.
$1 million is a lot of money when you have to raise it from scratch. How does an independent filmmaker do that?
Well, initially we tried, for example, to raise it within the community. We went around, we tried all the grant routes. Sometimes we got seed money, but often very discouragement, money that could not really finance historical drama. So what we did was we tried to cultivate African countries that have resources. We put together a German television production deal, British television, Channel 4. So all that, over the 9 years period that took us, we were able to piecemeal the budget, the money, the finance to ultimately do the film. Not that we had the million at the beginning of the film, but just as we went along, we shot the first part in Jamaica with big support from individuals and people. And then a year later, we shot the African part as we raised more money.
you take on quite a mantle as an independent filmmaker.
That is the only way we could do it.
It's the
There's
only
no
way to
other
do it.
way.
We have a clip from it that we saw bits and pieces in the package, but we have another clip. Let's watch that, and then we'll talk more about it. It won a cinematography award.
In Ouagadougou, the Pan-African Film Festival in Ouagadougou.
Very textured, I think. What is Sankofa about?
It's really about, you know, the power of history, exorcising the past in order to really, you know, come at peace with your present situation and forge some humanist future. The very title means that. And for me, it's really about the most ignored, the most discouraged aspect of the psychological memory of slavery. I always felt, as I came in contact with the idea of the enslaved population in the diaspora and its history and link to Africa, the most discouraged officially by all privileged people is to not allow black people exorcise slavery. And so this is one attempt in order to really exorcise the memory, because I do believe, you know, that does not just die off because politicians or few people wish it, but it has to be told. In telling it, you exorcise it.
The lead character is Mona, who is a model.
Yes.
And she time travels.
Yes.
Goes back
Yes.
to another film, Bush Mama, and that we also we'll see a clip from, has a woman at its center. I was curious as to the draw of the feminine for you. Is there a particular consciousness on your part as a male filmmaker that your central characters are women?
Well, it's really just, I would say if it is, it's subconscious. But for me, I also do believe, and I come from a society that women are the originators of all, including the problem and the solution of the situations that we find ourselves. So maybe that orientation, that cultural orientation, looms behind my, you know, writing as a subconscious force. But for me, I don't intentionally choose those things, but it's more of the story that I do. In the case of Bush Mama, it's you know, it's a woman that society never even reckons with her inner spirit, her inner thought, her capacity to even fantasize, because she is underclass or uneducated, whatever the criteria of elitist society affects us to people. I went in and I took a woman that usually would say she's on welfare, broken, and I try to say her resistance spirit within the context of her own historical circumstances. That was for me the most prevailing idea.
You know, you wouldn't have worked out in Hollywood at all.
I know it. When I left UCLA, I straight went to Howard because I knew I wouldn't go that way.
I can see you in one of those boardrooms.
Pitching.
No. We have a clip from Bush Mama. Let's take a look at it.
I know how to govern my future when I come out. I mean, if I come out alive. Because they'll kill a brother a year the moment one starts to see. They don't give a damn if one stays blind, since that is death within itself and don't pose the threat to their decadent society. But once you start to see, baby, the light, the truth, then they cut it by shooting you down. Though that will kindle many other lights. But baby, they always reacted irrational. They never knew or had the wisdom to overcome problems that face mankind. They always went about it the wrong way, since they are blinded within the desperate motive of profit. I'm sure in a short time, that'll sound different. But being behind bars one day, baby, is just as long as 10.
The Washington Post said about Bush Mama that fury shakes every frame. Suffice it to say, it's not a comedy. Must film hit as hard as your films do to be effective, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that is, I think I leave that to really historians and critics and also the audience, the people. For me, I think my measuring, in terms of my work, what I have taken as a measuring device is the African American and the progressive crossover white audience have always respected what I have attempted, however imperfect. And so the response of people, when I look at people possessively, a movie that is very imperfect, being taken possessively by black people because it somehow tries to quench their hunger, that is important. Somehow it tells me it is in the right direction with all its imperfection. But I also think, I don't think the artists are elected officials like mayors or governments to go around compromising a story of a people. I think telling the story in the most honest way, in the way you feel it, helps people transcend into a very strong community capable of comprehending each other's complex realities. Otherwise, you find escapist world, people who simplify complex things in order to just get by and then postpone and mortgage the future generation with all the problems.
We might have viewers, people watching this, who might be thinking what I'm about to say. Well, does he just want black people to watch his work? Doesn't he want white people or other cultures to share in his message?
Well, I think white people are spoiled, is my view. If they care, they can cross over. White people can afford to cross over to see my movies, and they have done. Most, I would say, courageous white people would cross without me tapping into that stereotype, feel comfortable at the expense of black people, saying, it will not offend you, the title. I don't do that. I do it, in fact, I don't even want to appease black people. Most black people would tell you this. My films are not comfortable, but I do not compromise them in order, in the back of my mind, when I write a script or make a movie, saying, would white people like to see my movie? Which is the way black films in Hollywood are put together. In boardrooms, black filmmakers, when they're honest, will tell you, they're always asked, would white people like this film? Nobody asks, would black people be offended with this movie? It's always, which means there's a class system based on race and how culture is, commodified. And so for me, that is the wrong route for art. An artist should be honest, and gutsy people should cross over. I'm not a clown, I'm not an entertainer. I go through 10 years, 15 years to find money to do a movie, and I don't owe anybody to tap dance. And on that basis, I think I have done okay. And I'm not a person also who's really craving for glory of any kind. I think for a boy who grew up in a little village, the limelight even that I'm offered is itself enough to say, you're doing okay.
I like that. Today you teach film, as our piece brought out, at Howard University. What do you teach them about the best qualities of a good filmmaker? What message do you give them? Or someone in the piece said he doesn't try to make carbon copies of his students. But how do you give them the ability to do this art?
Well, I don't give them nothing. In fact, I always said I confuse them because most students come to universities having made up their mind. By television, by Hollywood, they know what movie is about. And their original self and their true identity is buried in that whole garbage or baggage. What I do is cut through to go to the person to ask them if they have a grandmother, a grandfather, do they have a family, where do they come from, and do you have a story that you're passionate about, not the story you think is expected of you. And so if I've done 30 years at Howard, what I have done is really try to make these young people first find themselves, because in finding themselves, the true stories only needs to be cultivated, nurtured, and watered. I don't have to teach them, give them, because it's not like teaching for me is not a godly position where you invent filmmakers, artists. They come if there's a gift there, and if there's an environment that has nurtured what resonates within them. All I do is join the chorus of the most constructive person to befriend them and say, you can do it. Especially African American kids come in a world that say, if you cannot become this, you can't become. So many polluted propaganda silently badgered into their brains. So what I do actually is really almost try to find who they are and then help them find their voices in order to tell the story as a legitimate story, not a illegitimate story. I would just say, empower your grandmother from Louisiana. Oh my God, do you know how rich you are if you really write about her? Tell me more. Who is she? Where does she sit? Oh, on a swing, on a porch? Man, what does she say? This is what I do, which means almost as a story therapy, not a teacher because I think it's too arrogant to think that you can, hatch them, in instant coffee filmmakers from film schools. I don't believe that. No, UCLA didn't make me a filmmaker. It's the people I came across, my grandmother, my father, the black people who hugged me and said, I really like what you said about the movie. They cried. All these things has made me. Otherwise, I wasn't born to be a filmmaker, to say, I'm born. Oh no, I didn't even know there was film in this world.
Are there filmmakers you do admire, past or present?
There are, many, and sometimes they're very international. They're all over the world. More than filmmakers, I would say films. I don't know if you know, I like a film called My Life as a Dog. Is my favorite film. I try to show my students. I see a lot of old movies. I'm not crazy about contemporary films, and I think filmmakers like Francis Ford Coppola are giant filmmakers. I try to see their artwork and admire their attempt to make film within a commercial world. Then I have people like Charles Burnett. I don't know if you know him. He made the film Killers of Sheep. Filmmakers like that, Raoul Peck, who made the film Lumumba. These are the filmmakers that inspire me to also say, yeah, keep going at it.
We have 1 minute left, and I don't want to leave before asking you what's next for Haile Gerima.
Well, I'm trying to do a major project. I'm trying to do is about Maroons, and these are the story of black people in America who went to the woods, who went to the swamps, the mountains, to fight for their own freedom, not by the agency of do-gooder white people, but these are black people who decided they have to be free. Because I do believe most black people are mortgaged by somebody having freed them. I think the language of Lincoln freeing black people is a very loaded psychological message. So what I'm trying to do is bring this hidden story of Maroons in America and South America all the way to Brazil. So I'm trying to do a 7-hour documentary film and then come up with a fiction which will be a sequel to Sankofa on these Maroons who are like their own agents of fighting the evil system of slavery. That I think is a major contribution for those young people who try to really go into the historical documents to make more stories out of it.
And that's Maroons, like the
Maroons,
color.
yes.
The Maroons.
Yeah, these are like, the Maroons is like the Spanish called it Maroons, it means wild animal. But the Spanish in the Florida area called black people who were running away, Native Americans, as wild animals who run away. So it comes from Cimarron. Now it's Maroons as it's an English dictionary.
Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. This Moment with filmmaker Haile Gerima. We'll see you again. I'm Lee Thornton.